Okay, yeah, please. So first I want to get a feel for what comes to your mind when you think, when you hear the word cybersecurity. Okay? Hacking, hackers, fraud, compliance, okay? So, cybersecurity unfortunately has come, the perception is, it's all about fraud and hacking. Right? It's a bit more than that. We'll talk about that as we progress. Okay, that's good. Saving ourselves from online fraud, I think that's a positive spin to the whole thing. I appreciate that. Data security, that's good. Yeah. So there are a whole bunch of people attacking what is important to us, our data, our processes, our way of working, and we have to protect ourselves against that. Yeah? We can go to the next quiz. Yeah. This is a fun question. So look at this. So when faced with in case of cyber attack, I don't know how many of you seen this. You know, break glass and pull cables. But in real world, you wouldn't do that. So what would you do if you are actually faced? So Call Me IT guys is dominating there. So get the IT guys to resolve it, right? Why take the hit? Which is good. I mean, because there are a lot of times you don't know what is getting attacked. So that gets to my next question, right? How do you even know that you've been attacked? What makes you think that you actually had a cyber attack? This is a interesting question because most of the times you don't know, right? Again, I'm getting the answer out here. So a lot of times what happens is companies don't realize for 6 months that they've actually been attacked. So we'll talk about what does it mean? What does it mean as an IT professional to even understand cybersecurity? Right? So all of these questions are correct, but they're not enough to know that you have actually been attacked. A data being corrupted, right? A data can be corrupted for a lot of reasons. May or may not be a cyber attack. And data being corrupted could be only one aspect of the overall issue, right? Or a system application being done, that's the most common thing. Again, that could be because of a patchy CrowdStrike update to Windows as we recently saw just last week. Or which, the first fear these days, the kind of world we have come to, anytime anything goes down, the first thought which comes into mind in a lot of people is it's a cyber attack. Unfortunately or fortunately, in this case, it was not the case. It was just somebody messing up in the normal manner. It was not a cyber attack. I don't know how many of you remember, there was a steamer which went and hit a bridge in Maryland, right? And the bridge collapsed. Some 6 people died, and this was in the US. So one of the things the first thought which came there, was it a cyber attack? Did somebody mess up with the controls of that steamer, which prevented the steamer pilot to navigate it properly? So the first thought which is coming into people these days when something happens is it a cyber attack? Okay, let's go to the next one. So, how can we be secure? So we'll touch upon all these topics while going through the presentation, right? So, just some opinions I would like to get from people here. So, again, it's a trick question, right? The answer is none of the above because each of these, while being important, are not sufficient. These will not give us assurance that we are secure. First thing is we can never build apps. We can never be 100% sure that the apps we build will not have any vulnerabilities. I might be offending some of the software engineers here by saying that, but I've been a software engineer for a big part of my career. As software engineers, we use a lot of different components in what we build. We use a lot of third-party components, a lot of even the code that we write can and will have bugs which can be exploited. Right? So that building apps with no vulnerabilities, while it's a great thing to think about, practically it's not very viable. The next point, making all access 100% sure. So in today's world, access is from so many different places. Right? You can access your corporate network from your mobiles. You go to office and connect. You have some data on the cloud. So there are things on the cloud. There are things everywhere, right? And people access that data from a lot of different places. So making all access 100% secure is again one of those myths, right? Which it's one of those like I'll make the world free from all hunger kind of vision, which is while good, not realistic, not possible. Then securing the perimeter perfectly. What do I mean by perimeter? Like, I'm working in an office. I have some workstations in my office. I have my firewall. I have my switches. I'm connecting to the cloud. I'll draw a boundary around my cloud. I'll draw a boundary around all my office systems. That's my perimeter. If I can secure everything around that, well, I'll be safe. Again, that's a myth. Realistically, you can never draw a boundary in today's day and age. There are so many moving parts all the time. You access something on AWS, you access something on Azure, you access a third-party library which should be accessing something else somewhere. So trying to draw a perimeter on what all you access is almost impossible. So we'll talk about what it means, right? There are some techniques which have evolved to deal with problems like that. So this one was more like a word cloud, right? So that's what will come up. Please enter what would you do to be cyber safe? You can enter as many responses as you want. Just it'll throw up a cloud. I think awareness, yeah, that's a very good point. We'll talk about that. We'll talk about that aspect of it. Even being aware of what could possibly attack you and where the attack can come from. That is so important. Okay, I think we've got, so all these are very good responses, very relevant, and so those few questions was to start triggering the thought about cybersecurity. Right? Now I'll move to the boring presentation. Okay. So first thing in this presentation, I want to make it a bit more interactive, right? So please feel free to stop me anytime you want. Any point I'm making. Otherwise, cybersecurity can be a very dry subject. It is one of those things where you have to, it's where you get into a lot of detail, so it can get. So please feel free to stop me anytime, anywhere, and I will want to understand your point of view and then move from there. So that's Pragya, that's what we do. I'll touch upon that at the end of the session, what we do. So I have a couple of slides where I want to talk about what we are going to touch upon in this session, right? Cybersecurity has multiple facets. It is about protecting businesses, right? That's one big aspect of it. There is also the aspect of protecting individuals from an attack. As a consumer, today you have to be aware of a lot of different things where you have to have your password safe, your bank account safe. We are not going to touch upon that aspect. We are going to touch upon the aspect of how do we keep businesses, organizations safe. So it's more of, it's not to protect an individual, but I can answer any question you might have on that, but that is not the focus of my session, right? So that is one caveat, and second caveat is that I'm just touching the surface. I'm not, given I I can always get into detail if anyone is interested, but I'm just touching upon the surface of what the different concepts in cybersecurity are. All good so far?
Yeah.
So, again, I've put in what is a typical IT network. Right? So, a lot of you must be familiar with this. You have a bunch of laptops connected to a switch, which there's a router, there's a laptop, smartphone which can connect from outside the network. So think of this as being your network inside an office, those devices being outside. You have a firewall in your office, connects to a service on the cloud. A very, very rudimentary, high-level network in the IT, from an IT perspective. Right? This must be pretty familiar to a lot of people. So, next slide. This might not be so familiar. This is a network in a typical industrial sector. Right? So, industrial IT, this is called OT. Right? So, OT stands for operational technology. So, this has things like your actual physical devices which are connected to it. So a valve or a actuator, sensor, pump. You go to a factory. There's an actual. You go to a car, automobile manufacturer. There will be a hydraulic press which actually takes a sheet metal and shapes it like your car bonnet, right? So there is something pressing. So there is a actuator which is actually operating that pump, right, to press that sheet metal into the shape you want. This is a physical device. This is controlled by a PLC. And people with an electronics or instrumentation background would be familiar with this. But otherwise, a lot of people in other backgrounds would probably have not seen this. A PLC is a programmable logic controller. So it's essentially a ruggedized device which can hold a certain level of logic in it, and that it drives these systems. PLCs are interconnected to a switch, which is connected to a HMI. HMI is a human-machine interface. Right? So if you go to a cement factory or an automobile factory, there will be a big white screen in which the entire process will be there for that operator to look at. So this is engine 1, engine 2, engine 3, engine 4, or whatever, pump 1, pump 2, pump 3, and which pumps are on, which are off, what pressure is there, all the main parameters which are required for that device. Right? So all that is seen in the HMI. And there's a SCADA server. SCADA is a protocol which drives all this. So this is these are different level, Purdue level model. There's something called as Purdue model for OT devices. So this is a network in an industrial setup. You could have multiple setups like this. Then that's connected to a firewall, which connects to a level 4 and above is a normal IT network. So the reason I'm showing this is, as a security engineer, you are not just worried about IT world, you're also worried about the OT world. There are an increasing number of attacks happening in the OT world. In India, we have attacks happening on our electrical power grids from China. We have attacks on our hydraulic power stations on the borders. So if you, Jammu and Kashmir, Himachal, Sikkim, hydraulic power stations are actually attacked. We have data that China is actors in China are actually attacking that. Attacking critical infra has become one of the dimensions of a proxy war. So, in fact, cyber attacks have become, cyber warfare is called as a fourth dimension of war. Army, Navy, Air Force. Fourth dimension of attack is cyber warfare. So that has become so prevalent now. So every nation has to have an active strategy to protect itself from any cyber attacks. And India has more than enough enemies, right? We have a recent G20 summit. We had attacks on all our government websites from Malaysia, actors in Malaysia, actors in Pakistan, right? So that's like well documented and known information. So securing our industrial infrastructure becomes very, very important. And in this, the power sector is very important given the sensitivity of power, right? If you don't have power, you can't do anything else. Any questions so far? Any points you want to bring up?
So do protections on the upper layers ensure that the layers below will not get attacked?
Not necessarily. Go back to the previous slide. So there are different techniques for protecting above the IT level and below here.
Okay.
So traditionally, the OT network was what was called as being air gapped. So which means that there was no direct. It was always on the internal LAN. It was never connected to the internet. That was a way of protecting the whole OT network. But with the industry 4.0 and with the need for having to connect and drive real-time efficiencies, there's now a need to connect these to the OT system, IT systems. For example, you are manufacturing something at this level. You need the data of how much you're manufacturing going to your ERP. So you need to have that information real time to drive your efficiencies. So in that scenario, you have to now have a connection real time with the IT system. So there are different techniques here, there are different solutions here, and there's a different solution there.
Yeah.
So typically what would happen is there are solutions by companies like Clarity, Nozomi, Armus, where they have a sensor sitting here.
Okay.
And there is a particular collector kind of thing sitting at this level, level 3, which collects looks at all the network traffic real time, and then see if there are any anomalies in the network traffic.
Okay.
So that's sitting within this OT network.
No, because let's say there is a very genuine command, right? How will it differentiate between a malicious actor or the regular command? Let's say start word, which actually might not be coming from the application, but that command reaches any of these layers. So how will it differentiate?
So
whether it is malicious or?
So the way these solutions, they're called as continuous threat detection solutions. So they they are based on AI. So they observe the traffic pattern for a week, 2 weeks.
Okay.
And then normalize, baseline themselves what is normal. Right?
Okay.
And there are certain fixed rules which are there. There shouldn't be any network traffic from going at this level to outside, or outside to inside, unless it's some specific IP which is actually giving that. Any other IP is a no-go.
Got it.
Right? And also it baselines itself as to what is the norm, which PLC is talking to which actuator, right? Which PLC is talking to which HMI, and what is the amount of traffic which is actually flowing between these systems. So it baselines itself with all that.
So you will have ML models and
Yes.
Okay.
Absolutely.
So either it will be rule based or LLM, and you'll do ML, and then you train those models for that particular thing. Interesting.
So next few slides, I want to talk about some actual attacks which have happened, right? So that you get a sense of why this is important. Why cybersecurity is, the fact that you're sitting here, I know that you will think it's important, right? But just want to reiterate the fact. Again, I'll be using some industrial and some more regular attacks also. So there was an attack in 2021 called a Colonial Pipeline attack. Right? This was at the US East Coast, wherein the Colonial Pipeline is they get the gas from Gulf of Mexico, and then they distribute that to the whole East Coast of US. So these guys had a ransom attack in, I think this was July 2021. They were asked for $5 million as ransom. And they had to shut down their complete distribution system for almost 5 days. That actually increased the price of gas in a lot of places on the East Coast of US. So a particular, you can understand the impact of a ransomware, impact of something small on operations. So these guys actually paid the ransom, and they got everything running, and things normalized after those 5 days. But it was a very big impact in terms of millions of dollars of impact. It's another story that after about 18 months, FBI tracked those guys down and found they could retrieve the amount. It was in Bitcoin. So Bitcoin is perfect for cyber attackers, right? So a lot of payments actually happen in Bitcoins. So traceability, for traceability reasons. So there was a JBS ransomware attack. Meat processing company suffered a cyber attack. So when an attack happens in the IT world, it's all about data, right? You have data being stolen. You have data being compromised. Your system's availability being compromised. In the OT world, data is not so critical. I mean, it's not about data. It's about hurting your processes. Your systems being, if your operations are shut for a few hours or a few days, that's a huge loss. So companies would pay big money to not stop their operations. So that's how a ransom gang operates. They'll say that I will hit your operations. They're not stealing data from you. They're stopping you from running your operations. Right? So these are some of the examples of ransom on attacks, right? And some alarming numbers here, right? So 75% of organizations experience a ransomware attack, 23. 75%, right? Then, so here's cyber physical systems, right? Then 55, more than half reported that multiple sites were impacted in terms of cyber attacks. They said, 2/3 organizations incurred a total loss of more than 100,000 USD. So one of the things which has been happening with cyber attacks is till about 5 years ago, only the big guys were getting hit. Organizations which had large revenue, which had large install base, right? In the last few years, that trend has changed. We now have a lot of attacks happening even on the smaller players. Because, again, thanks to AI, thanks to a lot of technologies, cyber attack has become democratized. So, in fact, here it's probably a good segue to talk about how cyber attackers are working right now. Earlier, your typical notion of a hacker is some nerdy guy sitting in one dark room and then going and like some lot of big devices and like high GPU computers in front of him. It's no longer that. Now it's an organized industry. Right? So you almost have like a SDLC process in there. Right? The way it happens is there is a group which specializes in actually getting the credentials, which do these initial phishing attacks, which do your spear phishing, your social engineering. They focus on getting your credentials. Their job ends there. They'll get it, they'll sell it on the dark web. Then the next set of guys pick it up, who specialize in actually using that credentials to get data, to exfiltrate data from an organization. So that's a second set of people. So, because these require different specializations within hackers, right? So the second set would take the credentials which they have found and go to a company, go to that organization and get the data out. And then they get the data, and then the data is again put up for sale on Darknet. So that's the second set of the operations. Then there's a third set which actually uses this exploited data and then claims ransom. Or it claims that it'll hit your operation. In the IT world it's data, in the OT world it's hitting operations. The third set are the people who can actually have the infrastructure to go to a company and disable their infra and claim that who have the infrastructure to get the bitcoins and everything. Not all the hackers have all that. Right? So, and then the fourth guys are who will restitute the system after they're paid. So it's like a proper cycle. It's become a very organized industry. So it's no longer. That's why the number of attacks have increased. The frequency of attacks have increased, and you see that it's no longer one guy doing. It's no longer. It's not a hit and miss thing anymore. It's a very organized industry where once a vulnerability is known, there is a very thorough way of reaching out to all the systems which have that vulnerability and exploiting it. Anything, all this makes sense? Or please feel free to question anything.
So actually a few, maybe about 4 odd years ago, so one of my startups had a ransomware call. And it's just very small, there's nothing they could do and whatnot. I think the easier solution for us was that we just ignored that, restored from a backup because we had
a
so
backup,
small,
yeah.
and we had so small data anyway, right? So it's not like it was like any other organization, but I think it's been going on for a while.
Yes.
They probably played with smaller organizations and then moved up to large, much more organized.
Absolutely. I think the level of sophistication which has come in terms of how cyber attacks happen, that's just
So the recent one that happened with CDK Global,
yeah.
So was that, or we don't know yet?
I don't know.
Yeah, I think it's not out
details.
yet.
Yes.
They don't know why it was caused. That was also a big outage across.
That's the thing with attacks, right? A lot of companies are not comfortable talking about it.
Correct.
Right? For obvious reasons.
Yeah.
So only when you have worked on that particular case can you actually comment.
Correct. So that was, I think it shut down almost all the dealerships across North America.
I have a few more examples here, which are again things which have been published. So I'm only putting things which have actually been published in the news. So this was one big attack. The hackers piggybacked on a SolarWinds update. SolarWinds, as like any other software, has regular updates. So they sat on a SolarWinds update, which went to thousands of customers. That update itself had a malware in it. And that malware impacted 18,000 government entities and Fortune 500 companies. Huge, massive impact. So, which gets us to worry about even when you're downloading and you're having an update on your Windows systems, right? Any of the applications that you have in your own system, making sure that the update is coming from the right source is so important these days. Because your actual antivirus update itself could have malware in it. Right? So making sure you have the update coming in from the right source and that it's signed properly with the right encryption is important. That's a key thing. Getting an update from some shady website is not a good idea. Right? In fact, with the recent attack which happened, CrowdStrike and Microsoft, the blue screen of death, a lot of companies actually a lot of shady websites actually started publishing that this is the fix. That fix was actually malware. So we have failings, right? Like greed. A lot of individual people getting attacked by cybercrime is there's some element of greed in it, some element of fear. So a lot of cyber attackers for individual, they exploit fear. If you read the paper, you must have been following a lot of cases about how senior citizens are being swindled, saying that something has gone wrong with them. Something has gone wrong and they are responsible for it. And because they are not aware of what's happening, they're afraid. And then I know some cases personally where a person has lost like 97 lakhs. That person's whole pension, like lifelong earnings, is gone. So this was one really big SolarWinds attack. Next one. So something more closer to home. Dr. Reddy's was attacked in 2020. They had more than 150 servers, I think, attacked, and then it took a while for them to get operations back and running. They had cyber insurance, but still, the cost of actual recovery was much higher than what could have been covered by their cyber insurance. And again, the details are there in that link. So these are something which are more directly relevant for us. Our bank data getting breached. So PNB data got breached. So the next one is Air India data getting breached. So when such breaches happen, what happens? So you have the name, first name, last name, date of birth, your PAN number, your Aadhaar number, your address. All these details are there with a hacker. What will he do with it? He or she, to be gender neutral about it. So what will they do with it? That is used for social engineering. So when a hacker is trying to are people familiar with what social engineering is? Anybody who doesn't know? Okay, let me talk about what social engineering is, right? Social engineering is making you believe that is somebody who they are not, right? So somebody calls you on the phone and says they are calling from a bank, or they're calling from a police station, or they're calling from your telecom provider, and saying that they work for Airtel. And if somebody calls you on any number and says he's from Airtel, he has your name, he has your address, he has your account number details, you'll believe he's from Airtel, right? Or somebody calls from a police station and says your PAN, recently the most interesting thing which are happening is there is a call which comes from Thane, particularly Thane police station. The guy claims your name and address are being used to ship ATM cards to Cambodia. ATM cards and your SIM cards to Cambodia, and that's a grave offense. You will be penalized and all that. So you pay so much money and I'll take care of it. And these guys actually get on a video call, right? And he'll be wearing a police uniform. They have become so brazen.
So probably yesterday I was talking to someone. It's gone to the next level where they are using customs.
Yes.
So they say that there is a FedEx package and it was opened and found that drugs were there.
Correct.
And someone I know who, just to indulge the caller, was encouraging them to give more details. And they said that they actually had a court set up. So there was someone who came in a lawyer's dress. There was a judge who came. So there was a judge, there were people who were police and all that. It was a proper setup, all online, on a video call. and said, this is what it is, now I'm sentencing you, you tell us, we will take it. It was a proper setup.
Next season
Up kiya balance time.
Next season of Janta.
Yeah.
Yeah, Janta again.
Yeah. So they actually had that set up. So this guy who was there while he was playing along with them, he said, oh yeah, by the way, I'm from the SHO in some Delhi area and all that. So the guy said, hung up on him. And apparently they use the border areas of Nepal. So they take the money and they just move into Nepal. So they're not able to track.
Absolutely. I think so. These kind of breaches hurt us like that, where our personal data. Otherwise, how is our personal data being misused? Why should we be worried about our data getting lost or stolen because of such things, right? So somebody using that data to actually social engineer us, and these days it's getting even more complex with your deep fakes, and AI is enabling so much more. Next slide. So this PNB was one, Air India was one, we just talked about that. Okay, so I hope I've impressed upon you why cybersecurity is important, right? And what can go wrong if things are not secure. So let's look at what all are, I mean, where is it applicable, right? What all can go, where all cybersecurity is important and where all it can hit, right? So the simple answer is everything. So if you look at applications, all kinds of applications, your web application can be vulnerable. Web applications can have a lot of vulnerabilities like SQL injection attacks, SSRF attacks. There can be exposed to DOS attacks, DDoS attacks. I'll not get into all that detail here. Your mobile apps can be vulnerable. Mobile apps can collect. So there was an example of a mobile app which was a cute app, right? Which was where kids could play around and put some army uniform on them, right? You could put your picture, upload your picture, and put an army or a navy or Air Force uniform, and feel good about it. That kind of. This was being pushed to a lot of personnel in the army in border areas, and that app had a tracking enabled even without the user actually doing it. So what that was being used by our neighboring countries to track the details of army. If the kids are going somewhere, it's likely that the parent is going with them. So installing unofficial apps can have serious repercussions like that. You could have somebody who's not in India's interest tracking the movement of senior police officials or army officials. So it can, while it's so innocuous, right? I mean, a kid playing with an app to change some photos, which is actually leading to a national security issue. Desktop apps, enterprise apps, cloud apps, all kinds of apps, and then operating systems can have vulnerabilities. So what is a vulnerability, right? A vulnerability, that's a basic concept in cybersecurity. So vulnerability is where it's a flaw in the system which can be exploited by an external actor, right? So it's different from a bug. A bug could be functional in nature, but doesn't allow for any external actor to exploit it. But a vulnerability is one which can potentially allow somebody to access. So, a very simple example: if you have an overflow error in your code, you have a divide by zero error happening. You have an overflow error, and that is going into some memory space, which can be used to put in some other data. Some of these hacks can get quite complex. You can use that overflow to put in some other data in that buffer to do something else, right? So vulnerabilities can be exploited, can get very complex. So a vulnerability which can be vulnerabilities in the cybersecurity world, we are interested in those vulnerabilities which can be exploited by outside externals. And an exploit is something where it's a piece of code which can use that vulnerability to actually do damage. Right? So that's applicable for everything, right? So all the different types of apps, your firmware, your hardware. Hardware can have vulnerabilities. Your actual chip, your IC boards, your IoT hardware can have vulnerabilities, which can be exploited. Endpoints. Endpoints are anything on the edge, right? So your workstations, mobiles, IoT devices. IoT devices are proliferating everywhere now. Your CCTV cameras are everywhere. You have automated cars coming in. So there are a lot of science fiction movies where you have a self-driven car being used as a missile. Right? You can actually remotely control the self-driven car to go do a lot of damage. So although your car is an endpoint, because your car has more electronics in it than probably your laptop. Correct? So automobile security is a huge growing area. Printers, scanners, all these are endpoints which are vulnerable. So there's an interesting story about how vulnerabilities can be exploited. Right? There's again a very classic story in cybersecurity world. In Las Vegas, there was a casino in which they had this small IoT device to control the temperature of a fish tank. Okay. So just the water cools down, keep it at a right optimal temperature, and that was connected to their local network to get the temperature reading, right, and ambient temperature. That particular device, I mean, this is somebody's school project or something. They use some small board, they build something really cool, nice project. But they put it on the same network as everything else. And that particular device they put in that fish tank had a vulnerability, which somebody entered through that fish tank IoT device, got into the casino's actual servers, right, and stole all the customer data. Would you even imagine that? In a normal course of event, you wouldn't connect these two at all. That a simple device, some small, nice, cool device sitting to keep your fish tank warm, is actually can impact your customer data. So that is the kind of challenge we are seeing because of the interconnected nature of everything. Then on the network, you have switches, routers, wireless access points. All of these can be vulnerable. You have your D-Link routers at home. They have a set of vulnerabilities. If you go and search online, there is something called a CVE database. Right? The CVE is it lists all the vulnerabilities for different hardware and operating systems. So any device that you're using will have one or the other vulnerability. You can find all that list there.
So there was earlier, I don't know if it is still prevalent or not. So earlier when the smart TVs had come in, they used to have a camera.
Mm-hmm.
And so a lot of these access points were being used to see what was happening in the house. So they could actually turn it on and without the person, so the TV wouldn't turn on, just the camera would turn on. And they could actually see what was happening and they were able to track. So that's why I think later versions stopped having a built-in camera in the smart TVs.
And the same thing happened with Vice security cameras.
Yeah.
In US. People started observing
Okay, there's a site called Shodan, SHODA, Shodan.io, which actually lists a lot of CCTV cameras. It actually gets the feed out where they don't have the right control. I mean, their vulnerabilities have been exploited, or people have not changed the default password. Right? The vendor gives a default password.
Correct.
If the deployer doesn't change it, anybody can go access it. They are on the internet. Shodan.io actually gives you that information. You can actually see some footage of some shop inside some Norway or he's sitting anywhere. And there are a lot of Indian locations also there. Okay, so we want to take a break or
No.
you good? Yeah. So there are a whole range of attacks which are possible, right? So I'm just putting in a few here. Malware is it's not a type of attack; it's actually the actual exploit, right? So you have a piece of code which is using a vulnerability in a system to go exploit and do some damage. The damage can be in terms of getting you a blue screen of death, or it could be in terms of stealing some data. A lot of times the attack would be could be in terms of putting a bot in your system, in your mobile or laptop, and sending small amounts of information to something called a CNC, Command and Control Center. It could be sending small bytes of data to that. Over a period of time, that data which is collected by the CNC will become significant. So they want to stay under the radar, so they are not increasing your amount of data that is getting transmitted. So those are called APTs, right? I think I have it somewhere. Advanced Persistent Threats. So these are things which are lying in your system for a long time. You don't even, you have no way to actually realize that something is in your system. Because, you cannot scan all the file names, right? It could be masquerading as a known file name. You cannot, it won't show any spike in terms of data transfer because they're sending small amounts of data. It will not hurt your normal operations. It's just pushing small amounts of data on a continuous basis. And when the attacker feels he has enough data to actually do an attack, that's when they launch. So how do you deal with something like this? So that's why cybersecurity becomes complex. It's not a simple question of actually, putting an antivirus. None of these might not be, antivirus might not be able to even capture that. SQL injection. SQL injection is a very, rudimentary thing where you have a data field which is not, it's a bad coding practice where you can ingest a SQL query and go and try to access the data. Right? Credential stuffing. So you take a session and you take the session key and then you morph the credentials you have an access as a regular user. Then you have got the admin username. So that you take that session key, the session string, remove your user credentials and put the admin credentials there. If it's not scripted properly, if you don't have the right security settings, you could escalate your privilege from a user to an admin. That is again a very common way of attack. Right? So there are different ways to protect yourself against all this, but that's one way. Watering hole attack. Watering hole attack is, a lot of these are really nice, cool names. So cybersecurity things are pretty creative that way. Watering hole is where, in the jungle, you go to watering hole to drink, right? So watering hole is where people usually, which websites you usually go to when something happens. So if, now Olympics have just started. A lot of people would go look for Olympics, Paris Olympics. Create a fake site which looks very similar to a Paris Olympics site. People, you won't have to try and generate traffic, right? People will go there. You just have to figure out how to get in one of the top few search items.
So the Indian passport renewal, online renewal, it has this message that comes up. I don't know if you've seen it.
Yes.
So there's a message when you go
Nice
to the
red
site.
font.
Yeah, with a nice red font, it comes that please be aware that there are other
A lot
sites.
of fake sites.
A lot of fake sites, and don't use any other site except for this. And it's the same.
Exactly.
Because everyone wants a passport, right? So
Correct. When a calamity occurs, so again, as I said, they serve on fear, right? So when a plane crash happens, or train crash happens, people can easily put up a website which looks genuine and can attack you. Phishing. Phishing is again where the site is what you think it is, but it's not. So small differences, right? So you can have it look very similar to the normal site, but it's not. Banks have a lot of phishing. Then there are even earlier when you had a lot of these frames based websites, they could put a frame on a regular company's thing. So when you're clicking the button, you're clicking on their website actually. Right? But frames technology is gone, thankfully. You have XSS based attack, brute force attacks, cryptojacking. Again, brute force attack is where they can try a multiple set of passwords. There are tools which can easily, there are a common set of passwords available as a database, what people use as a password. You can go online and get that. So you know you have a username, and if that particular site is not configured properly, you can try all those millions of passwords with that username. That's a good. Cryptojacking. Yeah.
There was an actual app in App Store which I have used when I was small. Like it used to find the Wi-Fi networks around you and get the password. Like many of my friends have used it.
Okay.
It used to get the password in like 5 minutes. It used to like do all the.
Okay.
Try all the.
I hope you can close your data.
I don't know. I use my mom's phone.
A lot of people have their home Wi-Fi passwords to be like a welcome or a 1, 2, 3, 4.
Password is password.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.
Password is
7, 8.
password, right?
Password, yeah. Right? Those will be in your password list. Those will be one of the top 10 passwords.
Yeah.
Right? Pretty easy to get them. Cryptojacking. Anyone aware of what cryptojacking is? So crypto mining, right? So essentially cryptojacking is using your system to do crypto mining for themselves. Right? You wouldn't even know that. You will think your machine is slow, but a hacker could use your system to do crypto mining. That's cryptojacking. Social engineering, CSRF is a type of attack. APTs, BEC, again this is an interesting thing I want to talk about. BEC is business email compromise. I've seen quite a few of this in action myself. What it means is, there are multiple variations of this. You would be talking to a supplier. You have a connection with your customer. Your customer gets a mail purportedly from your account saying that your account has changed and please deposit the next account in next payment in this new account, and that account will be somewhere in I don't know, Cayman Islands or somewhere, right? Or in our case it happened in Algeria. One of Algeria's customers got an account saying that our account has changed and deposit in some France. It's an account in France, and that guy, it was a Nigerian guy who drove that. So they can intercept your email, they can replicate your invoice just the same as your regular invoice, just change the account details and spoof for the customer. If the only interaction is through email, he'll think it's genuine. So that's where your business email gets compromised. If there are no checks in place, your next payment goes to that new account, which obviously you don't have control on. The other variation is employees getting mail from a CEO or somebody saying, I'm stuck somewhere, please pay some money into this account. Right? I need some help. this happened to Goa High Court judge apparently, where it actually a lot of people got a message from that judge's number saying that I'm in a problem, I can't talk right now. Please put transfer this money to this. And people actually did. You know, when you get it from that number, you'll think it's true.
Many of the government officials and scientists, they like get online honey trap by will that come under social?
Yes, absolutely.
It comes like very frequently. We hear that news like, do they not know it is? Most of the time, it is more obvious like they are trying to extract the information.
I mean, this more about how human brain works, right? But there are those vulnerabilities in human beings which are exploited. So while some people don't know about this, there's awareness. That's why awareness is such an important thing. A lot of people are not aware that they can be potentially exploited like this. I think IT communities has a lot of awareness, but a lot of people outside IT world don't know about a lot of these things.
There was like some FBI person just to boost himself that like he works in the Pentagon, like just to boost about himself. He actually released few secret documents in an online gaming server, and they got released. And Russia also took them.
Yeah. Absolutely. I mean, he is trying to get some fame there, right? So.
I think, and many a times what happens is, even being aware, you can get a little complacent about it. So I remember when COVID happened, I think that lockdown happened, within like 7 days my laptop crashed. So there was no way we could get it repaired, and even the extra laptops we had were in office. So now all the Apple centers were closed. So the natural thing to do was to look out for other service centers who might be offering. And there was this news of, government is allowing essential services to take care of things. We went out, we go to Just Dial, we find actually it's a service center which is referred by someone. And this is a service center which is actually taking care, they are sending a person, they have authorized information. But this guy just heard from a friend, so we looked up online, went to Just Dial, and we picked up the number and called that person. Now there is this trust which has been created. It's not even that I did a Google search I need to be suspicious about. Bytridge has been basically engaging with them for laptop repairs. It's just that we didn't have the number. Luckily, I think he said that you need to pay in advance, and he said 500 rupees is what you will need to pay, and it made sense because the guy has to come. If I just back off in the last minute. But what interesting thing he did is he actually sent me, that time the UPI had just started. He actually sent a message which basically was to set up UPI, and luckily I was aware. But for a minute, I was about to forward him that SMS, like in that moment. But I said, look, why should I know that OTP doesn't need to be shared, but it was just fraction of seconds that, and I realized my bank account is getting connected with that. So even that bank account number was on my SMS. I said, no, this is not how we pay. And UPI had just started, I think, around COVID time. So one is examples like these where I think I've been trained at Microsoft for like every 6 months we have to attend that training.
Do a refresher.
And you think, this cannot happen to us. So that's why in my home, at least, my parents are banned from using anything. And I think if they get a call, we do it. I think I'll flip it a little bit. Since a lot of us are developers here, while we are all aware of the scenarios that are there, but when you're coding, or when you're designing a system, or if you're a UX designer, when you're designing an application, or if you're a tester, I think we get too technical and think very deeply about, code being efficient, code being right. But I think just coming out of that zone and thinking about how user will use this system, or how are they likely to trust it. Is it so? For example, in some of the very popular websites, they will never send you links because you get used to clicking on the links, right? And that means someday if the mail comes and you're not paying attention from a malicious actor, they will do. So basically you can end up clicking. So as a practice, as a suppressing the whole thing, the design itself does not allow anybody to send an email with the link, so that as an end user, you are trained not to expect links in your email. So I think when you're thinking of your systems that you're building in various roles, and I really say UX designer, product manager, developer, tester, and not just developer, think about how your users will interface with those applications. And I think this is a very good list of kind of attacks that can come your way. So think about it. Can it result in phishing? Maybe the way we are messaging, is it creating panic? So FedEx and a few others that Vasu was mentioning take a lot of precaution during their user experience, that they don't create a habit where some malicious actor can exploit it.
Maybe what we can possibly look to see, since a lot of them are like from a developers community, something specific, I don't know if you have it in the speech slide, but something specific for the developer community on what probably using the term loosely, like best practices or something that they should keep in mind when they are coding or a lot of them today with the environment, right? So a lot of them are working remote or they're working from different places. We may not have, when I say we, a lot of them may not have a strong firewall, or maybe they're using virtual machines or not. Maybe there's a good VPN connectivity or not. So maybe something like that you can touch as you go along. Maybe.
Sure. Let me. I can actually possibly show a demo of how a particular vulnerability assessment has happened. But I will have a detail on the type of protection which are there.
We can go, like I said, so we can go through it, but just
yes,
saying
I'll touch upon that
maybe towards the end.
Yes.
That at least something that you
So
can,
I was not going to coding level detail.
No, I'm not saying to the coding level, but
Yeah.
generally for developers, for
Yeah.
coders or the automation script writers, whatever. So typically what they should be aware of,
Yes.
where the vulnerability can come in.
Yes,
So
absolutely.
when you're looking at like an SQL injection, or if you're looking at any other areas, so if they are specifically IoT programmers, so you need to still do that. A lot of Android devices, even watches now have that ability to be hacked into. So just what people should be aware of.
Yes, there's one slide where we talk through the techniques of defense.
Sure.
I'll touch upon what's relevant for developers in there.
Is these attacks are should be handled by the individuals or by the organization level? Like these are like individual people may not have expertise in identifying this kind of attacks, because he may be working on some other task and then thinking some other. But how can he get expertise or think about these kind of attacks? Is it he should be trained in this kind of attacks, or organization should take care of this kind of things?
Good question. So there are multiple dimensions to my answer. Right? First is, as a individual, first you have to be aware of what can possibly go wrong. Right? In terms of, if you are a developer, you are building an application, what are the potential vulnerabilities in your application? You might not have a direct role in it, in terms of, suppose you are a Java-based coder. So there are a number of vulnerabilities which actually exist. There are some static code analysis tools, dynamic code analysis tools, which are part of a DevSecOps routine now, right? So that part is there for product development teams. That is at a direct detailed code level, where it will tell you that these are the possible vulnerabilities which can exist at code level. That I think every developer should know, right? How to run static analysis tools, how to interpret the results from static analysis tools, how do we run dynamic code analysis tools, and how to understand the results of that. That is a essential requirement for all developers. But apart from that, that's the at a code level. But at the next higher level is the product level. How is your product actually being used? That's where some of these concepts start coming in. Whether you individually will be trained on that or not is your organizational prerogative. That's not something I want to comment upon. But to become a good developer, I think you should be aware of this. Whether your organization teaches you or not, I think you should be aware of this. Right? You should be aware of at a product level how that product can be used and how that product can be exploited. How is that product being deployed? What is the environment where is that product being deployed on the cloud, or is it on desktop based on-prem? If it's cloud, what is the cloud protection giving you, and what should the product take care of from a cybersecurity perspective? And a lot of deployments today are on cloud, right? But AWS or an Azure or GCP, they provide protection for their infrastructure. While a cloud provider might say, I'm taking care of cybersecurity, they are not protecting your application or your data. They are protecting their infra. They are saying nobody can attack my data center. Nobody will be able to, my data center is not exposed to attacks. But they are not, they'll never say, I'm giving you protection for your data or your application. That you have to take care. So understanding how your product is deployed, what possible attacks can happen is important for you as a product developer. Does that answer your question? How to get that information is a slightly different topic. Some of it the organization will provide, but there's a lot of information will have to come through some amount of self-learning.
Yeah, and I think it's a two-way street. I think if you ask me, it has to be done by both. Essentially, a well-trained engineer will deliver the value that a company plans to deliver. And similarly, at your personal level, I think the onus cannot be just on the organization, because ultimately it is you who is becoming a professional, and you have a responsibility for that, and you need to be well-rounded. It's like a developer needs to be a good tester, right? So similarly, it is given that you need to be a good person who understands security, who understands scale, who understands performance. So these are not like really described. Just to give you another parallel example, right? You could be a good cricketer, but I think you also have to focus on your fitness and strength and on your endurance, right? So that is not given in your job description. Endurance, or if you're not good at your fitness, you will not be able to deliver the kind of outcome that is expected. So I think it's a responsibility of both, and cannot be looked as organization saying that, look, I have hired you and it's your problem, or the individual saying that, look, if you have not trained me, it's not my problem. I think it goes hand in hand, and I think it's for both to take care of.
Yeah. Yes, sir. It's not just about the programming. In many of my interviews,
increased exponentially in the last few years. COVID was a big trigger for cyber attacks. Working from home, working remotely. So these days, a focus on cybersecurity has become important for every sphere of life. So I'm not surprised that you are being asked those questions in an interview, because you should be aware of these concepts.
And I think you should consider those as good organizations and care for these things. That means you are going in a good environment.
So here we'll talk about some of the key concepts in cybersecurity, right? So these are something which will probably you can think about as being directly applicable in your role as a developer, product developer, or engineer, right? So again, I'm just scratching the surface. There's a lot of it to it. So there's this, again, some of you must have heard of this concept called least privilege. When only give as much access to a person as what's required for them to do their job. and not more, nothing more. So again, a very simple example. There's this person called Lynn who's in the finance department. What we are saying is, with respect, her role is accounts payable, right? So by default, don't give access to all accounting data to this person just because she's in accounting. She needs read and write access to account payable data, so she gets that. In account receivable, she gets only read access. Right? This is some simple concept you as a when you're building your product can think about. Who needs what access to play that role? You give different permissions to individuals, access to tables, access to different data within your application. Who needs what access? How long do they need that access? Right? Do they need the access for the entirety of a session? So the least privilege is a concept where you are reducing your attack surface. You are reducing the amount of time somebody can disrupt or steal your data. Right? So this one, any question on this? It's pretty straightforward to understand. Okay. We'll go to the next one. So there are a bunch of security principles which are important. Again, answering your point, Raju. So we need to look at security by design when we're building products. Security cannot be an add-on which you think about after building your entire product. It's not something like you build the whole house, now you want to paint it. So that paint is not cybersecurity. Okay? Right from designing your foundations, you're designing your columns, you're designing the strength of everything. Cybersecurity has to be, some of those principles are talked about here, right? So, very important, minimize the attack surface. What is an attack surface? Attack surface is everything that is exposed will be, once somebody logs in, can they access the entire product, entire data in your application, or can they access only parts of the data application, right? So that's your attack surface. The whole surface which overall data and the processes that are open to users to access. You want to minimize that. You want to keep it as low as possible. Now, one important thing in cybersecurity, when you're thinking cybersecurity, is the friction part of it. When you minimize this causes friction. Right? A friction so for example, I'll give you an example of what I mean by friction. So typically, companies have a lab network, and then the lab network is separated from your work network. When you want to transfer, while you're working in the lab, you have some file in your work network which you want to access, but you cannot because they're separate networks. There's some restriction. So that causes friction in your work. But why is that important? You want to keep your lab network isolated from your regular network because of good reasons. The security guys will, the developers will be very angry, right? Will be ticked off. Right? Why are you making me copy this into some agreed common share or put it in some USB, then clean it? See, I will not agree. You cannot directly access. So this causes friction. So a lot of decisions in security, it's a trade-off between how much friction you want to accept versus how much security you want to provide. If designed properly from the start, you can look at this in a more cohesive manner. If you try to attach security from top after you've built everything, it's very hard to work on the friction. Least privilege we talked about, the least common mechanism, psychological acceptability, separation of duties. All these have specific meanings to it. So separation of duties, who's doing what role a person is playing, and do they have access only to that extent of that role. Don't trust services, right? You are using a third-party service in your product. what all access are you providing that service for the rest of your system? Are you restricting that service? What level of permission? Is it running the same? Is that service running in the same process as the rest of your application? Are you running it in separate process? Right? As something as simple as that. What level of trust are you allowing a third-party service to run within your product? Defense in depth, we have a next slide, I will talk about that. Failing securely, how do you, when a failure happens, how can you fail without without others exploiting that failure? Right, I talked about that overflow problem. When a buffer is created, that typically, then when overflow happens, that can be exploited by attackers. How do you fail securely? Right, that's very important. These are all pure, strong coding practices. Again, I'm not an expert in all this, but if interested, we can get the right people.
I can give another example. Like for example, the developers have this habit of printing the exception if there is one, and invariably we put it on the screen so that it's easier for us to see. But what it can do is when you print the exception, it can give the attacker a visibility as to how code is structured and how the whole process works. So it's very, very important. Like these are, like failing securely is where you need to understand that, this is not something which goes to the, or you could actually give away the path to where the service is hosted, signature. Sometimes I think developers, because we don't like to debug, we prefer to print, right? And that printing code remains, and then that gives away the details, right? So wherever we are failing, some error comes in, I think putting that thought in your mind that, hey, am I giving away something to the malicious actor? And that possibly would.
Absolutely, yeah. Evidence production, right? So when there is something failing in the system or something is not, having a clear evidence produced so that we can manage it effectively. A lot of times security is so hard because you don't know what's happening. You don't know what component is crashing, where is it failing from, what's going wrong. So being able to produce the evidence and while you are building your products, making it clear that when one particular flow fails, it should be easy for people to understand why that is failing so that they can build it more securely. Open design. So you should be able to understand the design easily. The design is complex, then there's something wrong. The design by nature cannot be too complex. Isolated compartments. Right? Each component should not be impacting the flow of another component. When a failure happens, it has to be isolated within that component. So there's a lot more to these security principles than what I have talked about. But again, I'm not an expert here. We can pull in other people who can get into details of each of these. But as from a development perspective, these are a lot more. They get very important when you're building applications.
Yeah, this was a good slide. I think we should put it for our dev teams somewhere.
I can talk a lot more about this part, the defense in depth part, right? What happens after you build your product and the overall environment around it. So you are not relying on one layer to protect yourself. If you think about, a simple parallel for protecting your house, right? You're sleeping in the night, you shut your door, then there is a security guard if you're outside, then there is the police department. Secure your data. You secure your data by having your basic things like multi-factor authentication. Everybody is aware of what a multi-factor authentication is. You are not just using username, password, but at least using another factor So the different factors are like what you are, what you know, and there's a third one. Where you are could be one factor. So you are not relying on only one factor to authenticate yourself. So to username password is just something, one factor. You're using another factor. It could be your OTP, which is, or it could be your authenticated Microsoft. So that gives you that. Then data classification, right, is a very important point in protecting your data. Again, this is important at a developer level. You need to identify, classify your data. What I mean by that is, what is confidential, what can be shared within the organization, what is publicly accessible. Right? There are a very defined set of data classification terminologies. Right? You classify the data as to what can be publicly shared, what has to be confidential, there are some 5 different classifications. Once you classify data according to that, you will know which data can be shared with whom. Your applications and process can be built accordingly to that. Right? Based on the data classification that you assign to a piece of data. Data integrity monitoring, right? How do you know your data has not changed from the last time you accessed it? You're monitoring the integrity of that data. Data encryption, data drive encryption, right? Data wiping, PKI, public key infrastructure, using the public key, private key infrastructure to protect your data. DLP, data loss protection, right? So this has become more and more important with a lot of remote work. So how do you prevent people from sharing companies? There are solutions which prevent you. If it's an office laptop, you cannot be even using it for personal. You can't open Gmail on that, for example. You cannot post any file from there into. You cannot send anything to your personal email, your own personal email from there. It will track the amount of usage, data usage, and even when you're offline, you can't put a USB stick into it. And there are a lot of data protection, data loss prevention solutions available out there. You have data logging. So all these techniques are there in data security. So there are a lot of data security solutions are even related to masking the data. So if you have a teller in the bank, why does the teller need to see the whole account number? Why does the teller need to see your address? Right? So all these details matter when trying to protect your data. So masking the data is an important technology. Then you have your application security. Application security can be, again, there are a lot of techniques there. Having a WAF in front of your application, web application firewall, that's different from your regular firewall. This operates at an application layer level. Database security, then doing vulnerability scanning, dynamic app testing, static app testing, and the different logging mechanisms. All these techniques are at an application layer level. Then comes your endpoint. Endpoint security, you have endpoint hardening, we just talked about that. You can have an endpoint firewall, whitelist, blacklist of what is allowed to run in the endpoint. And when I say endpoint here, I mean your desktop, laptop, mobile, everything that you directly access. You have your EDR, MDR solution. EDR is endpoint detection and response, which will be continuously monitoring all activity on the endpoint and will be highlighting if there's any malware behavior in the system. Right? Does file integrity monitoring, if there's any change in the file. if there's from the it continuously keeps scanning. If there's any change in the file hash value, it'll pull it up. It'll be doing patch management. Windows keeps pushing a lot of patches, or any other applications that you have in your endpoint. It'll do patch management. Endpoint disk encryption, right? You want to use BitLocker or something to encrypt your hard disk. DLP, we talked about physical security of the actual laptop. Here there's a funny story. I just want to, one of the factories we went to, their way of, they had this, we asked them, how are you securing your laptop? With the one this was in a factory. So they had this nice big cage. So it was in the middle of the factory, nice big cage. The actual laptop was sitting inside the cage with a nice lock outside it. Right? That was their way of securing access.
But how do you use that?
So the guy had a key. The guy who had to use that laptop had a key. So that is their way of protection.
So there is this logging across all the layers.
Yeah.
Can this not also result in a security vulnerability with logging, or is it to track all the security incidents?
It is to track the incident. A lot of this logging data goes to something called as a SIEM, SIEM.
Okay.
Like a Splunk, QRadar. This log information goes to that system to actually track what is happening.
And all of it basically rolls up to some sort of a control center where people are.
That's the SIM tool, which it track. So large operations typically have something called as SOC, Security Operations Center.
Yes.
Right. So that SOC uses a tool called SIEM, where a lot of these logs go there, and again that uses AI to detect any behavior which is outside the ordinary, which is anomalous, right? So that's where logs at these different levels become important. One log by itself might not show there's a problem. So, for instance, somebody has logged into your application at 2 a.m. in the night. That by itself might not throw a red flag, but at the same time, it also shows at a network level a high file transfer also happening. That comes from a different log. So the SIEM tool will try to connect all the different pieces. There's somebody who's logged in at 2 a.m. There's this huge file transfer which has happened. That's not normal. Only somebody logging at 2 a.m. might not be anomalous. A large file transfer by itself might not be anomalous, but both together at the same time could be something anomalous. That's where the SIEM tool takes all this and then identifies that potentially this could be a problem. That's endpoint. So you have all these set at endpoint level. Then you have the network. Network level are all your firewalls, your intrusion detection system, intrusion prevention system, the IDS IPS system, virtual patching. Virtual patching is a concept where you cannot do the real patching of a software. Right? So you could be having a Windows XP system still running. There are a lot of organizations still run Windows XP. Right? You don't have, I think Microsoft has stopped giving patches. So how do you protect a Windows? They have a good business reason to continue using Windows XP. I mean, we have this saying in the IT world, right? If it's running, don't touch it. Let it run. Don't mess around with it if it's working. So how do you protect? So you do virtual patching wherein you control the amount of access that system has to rest of the network, what access it can do. So you're actually putting some kind of, you know that these vulnerabilities are there. So you put in a layer where those vulnerabilities cannot be exploited. You cannot fix those vulnerabilities, but you can put in a virtual patch so that those vulnerabilities are not exploitable. Again, that gets very, we can what that really means, we'll have to get into details. And then network level, you have your wireless devices, your VoIP security, physical security again, network device hardening. So firewalls, I don't know how many of you are familiar with what a firewall does. A firewall essentially controls traffic, right? Your network traffic in and out. You have a bunch of rules in a firewall where you can tell the firewall, allow traffic from this IP address. Don't allow traffic from this IP. Don't, you can control it to a pretty granular level. You can say that these hours only allow this. You can put in a whole bunch of rules in a firewall to control your traffic essentially. So, and how do you determine what's important? So these firewalls are connected to what is called as threat intelligence. So there are a lot of providers of threat intelligence solutions which will tell you that, okay, these are potential indicators of compromise. We know that attackers are coming in from this IP address. We know that these particular systems, MAC IDs are potentially issue. We know that these URLs are potentially suspicious URLs. So a firewall will have all that data and will be continuously checking that any traffic which is coming in doesn't fit in with one of those parameters. And if it does, it will block that traffic. So a firewall is effective as long as it has good threat intelligence data. If it does not have good threat intelligence, it's working with, the firewall is not very useful. Because today's day and age, static rules are not useful anymore. Your rules have to be dynamic. You can't have a static set of rules and be happy and think that you're secure. Then you have a perimeter which is kind of overlaps a lot with the network level, where you have VPNs, you have DDoS prevention. There are, again, each of these layers have a whole bunch of products in the cybersecurity world to protect yourself there. So just addressing the point on what developers should do. There is a vulnerability assessment which developers should be aware of. There are tools which scan and which you can do at a product level to scan for vulnerabilities. There are a lot of concepts at a architecture level which incorporate security architecture and design concepts. Those are important to understand. There is penetration testing is where you're actually using an exploit to test out a vulnerability in your product. Right? So that is what is called as penetration testing. So doing regular VAPTs, vulnerability assessment and penetration testing on the product that you're building becomes important. Right? Making sure that that product is working fine and is not exposed to any vulnerabilities. Okay, any thoughts on this?
Yeah. Now that we are going towards using a lot of AI-powered products, what kind of cybersecurity concepts come into picture to avoid any threats?
I have a slide later on that, but I'll just touch upon that. So AI and the latest the generative AI, ChatGPT and everything, have made the complexity go to an order of magnitude higher. Right? So I'll touch upon that in the different slides. Any other thoughts on this?
So I think there is also a larger design around it, which is we don't have to like really do all of it in all scenarios. So it's like the kind of security or walls that you put, say, in front of a prime minister's house would be very different than. So it really depends on how mission critical an asset is. That we look at like how much of it is there because it has its cost and I think loss in performance. I think that's one thought that I had. And like you said, there are also IDs, even when you code, essentially ID itself will tell you that the code that you're writing or the library that you have pulled in has these issues. We have DevOps tools like what you were referring to earlier, like SonarQube and few others, which when you are deploying the code or checking in the code, they will actually throw out. So what is important is being aware at an organizational level and at a developer level, and ensuring that you use them regardless of what the security expectations from, say, product or a customer are. I think that's my suggestion. When you understand all of it, I think those things. So be aware of tools and the warnings that come along with your IDs and CI/CDs and stuff like that. Yeah. I think this is also pretty good.
Absolutely. So there are more than 100 products available in the security space. And no company, even the largest ones, won't put everything. And even if they put everything, doesn't mean they're fully secure.
Yeah.
So absolutely understanding what is important for you becomes very critical. What is your process? What is your data? What do you need to? Every situation is unique in that sense. What your environment is plays a very big role in determining how you should protect yourself, which is common sense, right? I mean, what your environment is, understanding that is very, very crucial. Okay. You had any point?
Yes, sir. I mean, do we have companies like that provides the security auditing? So yeah, I hear some back. So you just develop the product, don't bother about the securities and all. There are companies who will provide solutions that they will do auditing and all. They will tell you how much vulnerable you are. So that is also one point which I hear about. So not considering the initial days about security and all.
That's like saying I will not worry about my health. Later, when I have a problem, I'll go to a doctor. Right? So that is okay if the product has been built a while ago. Today's day, that's not the right way of thinking about it. So while there are companies which we do audits, I mean as Pragya we do audits. We tell what gaps are there, but that is not a replacement for a product developer thinking about security himself. Right? Because, as I said, security has to be looked at from a design perspective itself. What a third-party company can do is help you with the external world of how, given that you have a vulnerability, how can you protect yourself? But as a developer, you know inside of how the product works. How do you reduce the impact of a possible vulnerability is something you can do from inside. Okay. So I just thinking that a third party will come and take care of all this is not the right way to look at it. A third party can look at it from an outside in view, not inside out. Okay. And the other big concept in security is zero trust. Anyone's heard of this word called zero trust? It's a very big security principle. Essentially, zero trust is like don't trust anybody, right? Anytime you are actually providing access, you verify every access item. This is again an important concept to think from a developer perspective. A particular user is accessing your application through a session. That person has accessed it now. 5 minutes later, can that user access your application with the same session? Or would that user have to re-authenticate himself? The user has accessed they have authenticated themselves, they've come in, they have accessed this system. Would they have to authenticate themselves again to access a different system? Right? So zero trust principle is a trust is very tokenized. A trust is you allow a person to access your system given a particular set of criteria and only for a particular resource. Just because the user has come into your system doesn't mean you provide access to everything. And the user has come in, the user has come in now, doesn't mean the user still has access 5 minutes later. There's a time dependency, there's a location dependency. So you look at a trust from a lot of parameters, not just username, password. You look at the location, what is the device they are accessing from. You must be getting mails on your Gmail, right? Suddenly if you access it, you go to somewhere different location, you get a warning on your Gmail saying that we noticed a login attempt from a different location, is it still you? And that's what's happening here. So you build in concepts of trust which are very, very specific in nature. Time, location, device, and then which parts of the application you are providing the access to. So look at access as a very, very atomic thing. You don't give trust out to everybody. So we have entered this building. So zero trust would mean that people who have come to access this session can only walk in from the main door into this conference room. They can't go to any other conference room. They can't go to the next floor. But right now, when you get into this building, you can go anywhere in this building, even though you've come for this session. So think of it like that. Any thoughts on this? So zero trust is a principle which has caught a lot of acceptance. So when you are building applications, when you are doing anything, please read up on zero trust. This is a pretty important principle to know.
An example of you failing to enter the correct password for 3 times and your access to website getting blocked for a day is actually the third example of block access. Right? So that's also an extension of zero trust. Right? So
that's to some extent that also is for like preventing a brute force attack.
correct.
You don't want people to try out a lot of different passwords.
Correct.
So that to prevent a brute force attack.
And I think it has matured over. So earlier it used to be that now you have to go to either call a call center to get that reset.
Now you can regenerate.
So now either you can regenerate or you can attempt a day later.
Yes.
So that basically elongates the duration to really crack.
Correct.
And it's no more attractive for, say, a hacker.
How are we doing with time?
You're at 12:30.
Okay, so let me rush through. Okay, so it is not very clear, but I want to just run through some of these things to just get your feel for the whole cybersecurity world. Right? There are some of these are key certifications which are important from a cybersecurity perspective. GDPR is for data privacy, Europe market. PCI DSS, anything to do with payments card industries. All your credit cards, everything that are used are in the PCI DSS world. HIPAA is for health industry. So if you are in the US, you are in the health sector, you have to follow the HIPAA guidelines. CCPA is California data privacy law. ISO 27001 and a lot of different ISO regulations. Again, some of these will become important when you're building products. You have to understand these standards. A lot of times